one of my psychiatric colleagues, we were smoking the toad once at a retreat center, and he was driving home on the Pacific Coast Highway, and he just fell over onto the passenger seat. He just lost control, and thankfully he could step on the brakes and
That's not
stop. And
optimal.
no, so that's a side effect as well as
Okay.
flashbacks.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air. I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually you could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, proudly presented by our friends at Montana Knife Company. Today, we are going to be talking about the medical case for psychedelics in therapeutic use. We're going to be talking about the real research behind psychedelics and the benefits of their use with Clinical Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the University of New Mexico School of Medicine, Rick Strassman. Mr. Strassman was the first person in the United States to undertake human research with psychedelic, hallucinogenic, or entheogenic substances with his research on DMT. He's the author of several books on the topic, including the Psychedelic Handbook and DMT, the Spirit Molecule. A few stats about psychedelics before we kick in. In 2000, Johns Hopkins University received the nation's first regulatory approval for psychedelic research. A 2016 study found that magic mushrooms help ease anxiety and depression among people with cancer-related mental health issues. A 2020 study found that psilocybin can bring relief to people suffering from major depression, and a 2022 study found the relief for major depression can be effective for up to 1 year. How did you come to find yourself studying psychedelics?
You know, as a kid, I was always interested in fireworks and bombs.
I already like this story.
Bright colors and smoke and
Yep.
danger and chemistry and all that. Yeah, and back in the day, you could go to the drugstore and buy the ingredients for gunpowder. Yeah, so I just went down to our local, I think it was Long's Drugs in the San Fernando Valley, and I just bought stuff. And then the quantities weren't quite what I wanted, so I found a chemical supply house in Chicago, and I get like half a pound of saltpeter and a pound of sulfur and all that, and just make crazy stuff. Yeah, the kids in my neighborhood stopped coming by after a while because they were afraid of what I was cooking up. Yeah, so I started college as a chemistry major. I wanted to like start my own line of fireworks. Um, and I was discouraged, like, you're smart, you should be a doctor, that kind of thing. So there was that academic kind of backdrop. And then I smoked hashish when I was 18 years old, and like I was I still am, but like at that time I was only a neurotic Jewish kid from Los Angeles. And I smoked hashish, and within 5 minutes there were purple clouds coming out of my speakers, and I had never felt more relaxed and happy in my entire life. And I thought, whoa, this is amazing. And I thought to myself, it's chemistry. Like, before it was me being myself, and then I inhaled this plant substance and everything totally changed. And and I was hooked. Like, okay, I want to understand how chemistry could have such profound effects on the mind. And also, I wanted more experiences, but academically or intellectually, I was, really struck. That was like the question that came to mind back then. So I learned meditation, back in the day, and was struck by the similarities between certain effects of meditation and the effects of certain drugs, the visions and the voices, out of body experiences, new insights, extreme emotions, those things. So I started, postulating that there must be some common, denominator in the brain which is turned on, when you're in an altered state of consciousness, be it from drugs or from,
Mm-hmm.
from meditation or psychosis, schizophrenia. Yeah. So uh, I began, looking for what I ended up calling a spirit molecule, some, compound in the brain which was responsible for those, kinds of altered states. And I was, drawn to the pineal gland, which is a small organ in the middle of the brain. It has a long history of importance in esoteric, physiology. Like it's the location of the experience of, highest, spiritual states. The white
Hmm.
light and things. And back then there wasn't much known about melatonin, which is the main, hormone from the pineal gland. So, there were even, some studies indicating it, could be psychedelic. Um, so I studied melatonin. That was my first independent, research protocol, and we looked, very carefully at the psychopharmacology of melatonin. And it was not especially psychoactive. Well, it was only sedating, which everybody knows now. But back in the mid 1980s, we didn't really know much about it. Yeah, so by then I learned about, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is a, brain compound as well. It's, made
Mm-hmm.
in the body like melatonin, and it had been used in, scientific, studies in humans before, and it was, quite psychedelic. And it also is the visionary ingredient in ayahuasca. So there were a lot of things, pointing to the importance of, looking at DMT. So I switched, tracks from the melatonin work, to the DMT work. In between was a lot of school, like,
Yeah.
college, medical school, psychiatric training, clinical research, training, and then, 2 years after that of training. So it wasn't like I just, said, oh, I want to study DMT. It was a long, long process.
Yeah. Well, at the end of that process, or at least during it, you were the first person in the U.S. to undertake human research with psychedelics, hallucinogenic, and what is this word? Entheogenic substances?
Entheogens, yeah, I kind of frown at that term.
I
But
don't
yeah,
even know what it is.
it was the first new American study in a generation. Yeah, yeah, we studied DMT extensively, and we also studied psilocybin. And I, provided a lot of, consulting and advising to other groups. Yeah, entheogens. I'm not, crazy about that term, because it's kind of, freighted with a lot of assumptions. Like it means, generating the God within. So
Oh,
you
interesting.
need, to, believe in God to, like, use that word, or spirituality even. Like, is there a spiritual, level to reality? Some people think so, some people don't. Um, and it also assumes, that it's internally generated as opposed, to an external God.
Mm.
Most, Judeo, Christian types, they think of an external God. There's
Yeah.
God out there, and there's me here, and, there's an interaction. And, the gen part is, generating, which is, it assumes a lot as well. Like, the drug is, generating, uh, uh, divine experience within. So I prefer the term psychedelic, which, just means mind manifesting, or mind, disclosing. It amplifies what's in your mind, either more or less conscious.
Was it tough for you to get approval for that research? And then how did you actually conduct it? I'm curious. Once you did receive approval, you have the ability to do some. I'm fascinated at the actual mechanics of how you did it.
Well, yeah, it was crazy. It was like, 2 years of nonstop, volleying, back and forth with, various regulatory agencies. Um, well, I started off with, some experience, trying to get an MDMA study off the ground. This was in 1985. It was just put into Schedule 1, and I was interested in an MDMA study. in normal volunteers, what's MDMA doing biologically and psychologically. So I began working with the FDA and with the DEA to do a Schedule 1 human drug study, which was very discouraging, but at least I began learning the steps. um, so once I changed focus from the from the melatonin work to the DMT work, I had a little bit of familiarity with what I was going to be facing. There were three boards at the university that I had to work with. The scientific advisory board for the Department of Psychiatry, the scientific advisory board for the research center where the study was going to take place, and the institutional review board of the university, which is the ethics committee, like the informed consent. Are you do you know what you're doing? Are you telling people what they're getting into? Are you taking account of the risks? First do no harm is their motto. So once I got that approved, I had to get a Schedule 1 permit from the state. And so all along I was telling people I wouldn't be giving the drug until I had all my permits in order. But in order to get all my permits in order, I had to go through a stepwise process. So the state and the university approvals, they were difficult, but they weren't impossible, and I got them taken care of in maybe 3 to 6 months. The real bottleneck came with the federal agencies, the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Food and Drug Administration. Yeah, so the FDA was interested in the science, like is your does your protocol have merit scientifically, and the DEA was concerned about diversion and security. um, the FDA was also interested in the safety of the actual compound itself. Was it pure, was it sterile, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I couldn't I couldn't determine the safety or the purity of the drug without possessing it. But I couldn't possess it without a Schedule 1 permit. Um, and the DEA wouldn't give me the permit until I had FDA approval. One of the problems was the DEA and FDA were not used to speaking with each other. There were no channels of communication. Like after the passage of the Controlled Substances Act in 1970, there were a lot of animal studies that continued with Schedule 1 compounds, but no human studies. So the FDA, so the DEA was comfortable giving Schedule 1 permits to animal researchers. You just needed to make certain that nobody handling the compounds had a criminal record. The security was in place. There was a
Yeah.
vault. Only a certain number of people had the key. The FDA didn't have any experience doing Schedule 1 studies. So uh, a lot of the work involved just opening channels between the FDA and the DEA. So I had to promise I won't do this until that. I won't do that until this. And then finally the main the last problem was getting the drug. Who's going to make it. So I couldn't like extract it from plants and those sort of things. I mean you had to be synthesized in the lab. So I started looking around. Sigma Chemical, who provided the melatonin for those studies, you, you, um, they had some on the shelf. And I said, well, could you purify it for me? And they said, no, too high risk. And then I called one of the government agencies responsible for making drugs of abuse, and they said 50,000 bucks. So I said, no, I can't do that either. Yeah, so I was just pleading all around all my chemist friends that worked at universities, And Dave Nichols at Purdue University back then said, okay, I'll make it for you, for the cost of materials for $300. So I said yes. Yeah, so he made it, and I put it through his paces. uh, yeah, so it was a 2-year process. The first paper that I wrote was about how I got permission. Because I was afraid, what if I'm run over by a bus? I never publish, and nobody knows how to do this. So I wrote a paper, how I got permission to study DMT. So others could follow in my footsteps if there weren't the possibility to consult with other groups interested. Yeah, because it was pretty Kafkaesque, like just bizarre. Yeah, but I figured as long as they weren't telling me no, I figured there was still some possibility of it, uh, coming through.
I hope you are enjoying season 2 of Change Agents, which is an Ironclad original. And if you are a fan of the podcast, you know that we are presented by Montana Knife Company, which from where I am sitting right now is a short 2-hour drive, maybe 120 miles due south towards Missoula. I was first exposed to this brand through its founder, Josh Smith. And actually, when I first met him, I wasn't even aware of what Montana Knife Company was. He sat across the table from me. We had a conversation, and I have been a fan ever since. This was a few years ago, and the velocity and trajectory of that company is unbelievable. I directly associate that growth with who Josh is, what he stands for, and what he puts into his product. So a little bit more about Josh. He's been making knives for 30 years. They're made in the USA. They have a multi-generational warranty and free sharpening. They're design tested and they're built by hunters, and MKC's a hunting knife company first and foremost. They sell out their knives sometimes in under 60 seconds. And if you want to see what they have available or what's coming up, surf over to montanaknifecompany.com. They have a new knife drop every Thursday at 7 p.m. Here's what I'm going to say on that. Practice checking out. As ridiculous as that sounds, you need to have your credit card information loaded and practice the checkout process, because they go like that. I cannot even count the number of times I have had a knife taken from my cart because somebody was faster to purchase it than I was. People ask me all the time, what's my favorite blade of theirs? I go with the Mini Speedgo. It is my everyday carry knife. I don't use it for knife fighting. I use it for things that I need a knife for, so usually opening boxes. But it is my favorite blade, and if you're a fan of working knives made for working people, I highly suggest that you check out Montana Knife Company. And I'm going to add to that, let's talk a little bit about the warranty. They have the best warranty program in the industry. No matter if you bought the knife from them directly, or bought the knife from a friend, or it was gifted to you, or if you even found the knife, they're going to honor the warranty for the life of the blade. How awesome is that? Couldn't be more proud to have them as the presenting sponsor of Change Agents. They are a fantastic organization. So when you finally get to the place where you reach out, your buddy makes them for you, like you said, you put it through the paces. Is this, I'm assuming that you're not just doing this in a broom closet by yourself in the college, that you're in some type of setting. Is this self-reported, or is this a combination of people watching, asking questions? I'm just fascinated on how, when you're doing this study, how does it go from your experience to something that can be then translated to the potential health benefit or things that can be done from a therapeutic perspective?
Well, so how do you do clinical psychopharmacology study with a drug like DMT?
I imagine that you strap yourself into an ejection seat, you're surrounded by video cameras and doctors, and it's go time.
It's it is not too far from that. I'm actually people were fairly wired for sound. Well, the studies occurred on what was called the Clinical Research Center, the University of New Mexico Hospital. It was a specialized ward on the fifth floor, and clinical research occurred there. Diabetes research was the main thing that was going on back then on that unit. It was also a unit where experimental chemotherapy was being used in cancer patients. So some days it was pretty grim. the atmosphere was, fairly dark. Um, but we had our own room, most of the time, room 531, down the hall. Um, so it was me and a nurse in a little room, and the volunteer on the bed. Oh, one thing to keep in mind, too, is our studies were with only normal volunteers. We weren't doing therapy, and we screened people, very carefully. And if they were suffering from any emotional disorder, we excluded them.
Just out of curiosity, how did you find those volunteers? Is this a flyer where somebody's like pulling off the phone number at the bottom?
We screen people carefully, very long, psychiatric interview, medical exam, EKG, blood test, that kind of thing. We got to know them. Yeah, so we gave the drug intravenously. Older studies giving DMT gave it intramuscularly, and in the street it's smoked, or in the field it's smoked. But we didn't think smoking would deliver the drug consistently, and there's coughing, and there's potential lung damage and things. So we started off giving it intramuscularly, but because our funding was from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, we wanted to replicate how it felt when it was being used as a drug in the street or on the street. So the first couple of doses were intramuscular in people that had smoked DMT before, and they described it as too slow, and not as intense as the smoked version. So if you want to replicate the smoked route of administration, you give it intravenously. So we switched to the intravenous route. So people would come in, and we would have one intravenous line for the drug administration, one intravenous line for drawing samples on the blood for all kinds of endocrine results, cortisol, prolactin, growth hormone, beta endorphin, those kinds of things. A cuff on the arm to measure blood pressure, and a rectal temperature probe, to measure temperature. It wasn't as horrible as it might sound. It was like 4 inches, like a thin wire. You just put it up there and you forget about it. Only one volunteer out of 50 plus flatly refused the temperature probe. Everybody else agreed to it. So they'd be lying in bed, the nurse on one side, me on the other. And I would say, collect yourself, get yourself, you're ready. And, when you're ready, let me know. And people would lie down flat, meditate or breathe or, whatever. And, they would indicate to me that they were ready. Yeah. So I would start the infusion and I'd say, I'm starting the drug, and I would give it over 30 seconds, pull out the needle, and I would then, I would, flush out the line with sterile salt water to empty the line of any remaining drug. And I would say, I'm starting the flush now. Squirt that in over 15 seconds. And if it was, the high dose of the drug, by the time the flush was maybe one halfway through, people were gone, just gone. They no longer were in their room, or their minds were no longer in their room. Those cuffs, those automatic cuffs, they really have an iron grip. And most people were not able, to feel the grip of the cuff at the 2-minute point, and most of them couldn't feel it at the 5-minute point either. They were so dissociated. In other words, within a few heartbeats, they would be in this DMT world. So it would, and we just sat by quietly. If they began shivering, whatever, we'd put a blanket on them. If they extended their hand for some support, we'd hold their hand. But mostly, these were a pretty stout group of volunteers, and they were managing on their own by and large. Yeah, so they'd come down, they'd be able to start speaking at 15 to 20 minutes, but we're still pretty stoned. And if, they felt like they wanted to start describing what their experience was like, we would, tell them to, to stay inward for like another, 5 to 10 minutes. And yeah, so I'm at the half hour point, they'd be down and we start talking. I would give them some questionnaires. They drink some tea. Yeah. And we spend about a half hour or, like another half hour, another hour, talking about their experience. They'd have breakfast and go home. Yeah. And, we'd call them the next day, make certain everything was all right.
What was the response from, I guess I'll call it the traditional or the outside medical community to what you were doing?
Well, that's a good question. It was dependent on the generation of the scientific community. The old timers who had cut their teeth on psychedelic drug studies in the 60s. Like I was in a meeting once, a scientific meeting, and one of the old timers, and I was standing in front of my DMT poster, like I'm giving DMT and the blood pressure's going up and the questionnaires are indicating these kinds of things. And this old timer came up to me and he said, "It's deja vu all over again." Like he said, "Oh, you're studying DMT. Like that's interesting. It's been 20, 25 years since anybody's given DMT." So they were kind of amused at the fact that these compounds were being used again. My generation, the younger generation of scientific researchers were kind of freaked. Like, are you sure you should be doing this? Is anybody still interested in these drugs? Aren't you afraid of ruining your career? Why are you doing this? Or just kind of dismissive, like, oh, whatever. So it was interesting, the split between generations. The government was very keen on the research. Like, there was a myth out there, that there was no human research, going on, because of government suppression. But on the contrary, there was no research going on because nobody had come forward with a rigorous, scientifically valid research protocol. And once once one came across their desk, they went, woohoo, finally somebody
Oh, interesting.
is going to be um, unearthing human research with these compounds.
How did DMT and psilocybin get put on as a Schedule 1? When did that occur?
Well, all of the classical compounds, which include mescaline, LSD, psilocybin, DMT, they're all scheduled. Back in 1970. Some of them were scheduled, because of actual data. Like DMT is psychedelic, psilocybin is psychedelic. Others were placed there, like almost through guilt by association. If there were some animal data suggesting that animals responded to drug X like they responded to LSD, then drug X was lumped into Schedule 1 as well, even without a lot of human experience. Yeah, your Schedule 1 compounds were reserved for those with no known medical value, highly abusable, and could not be given safely even under medical supervision. So it was interesting once our studies began. I wrote to Janet Reno, who was the Attorney General under Clinton's administration, and I said these compounds shouldn't be Schedule 1 anymore, because I'm giving them safely under medical supervision, and they are interesting research tools. They I was willing to go with the highly feasible part, that wasn't anything I, could really argue with, but, they could be given safely, and they had, and, they had uh, medical utility in as much as they were providing, valuable information about, how the brain worked. So they wrote back and said, well, it's an act of Congress and we have to, DEA and all that sort of stuff, so they kind of punted. Uh, but it is interesting, to consider their placement in Schedule 1 with all the interest in using them as psychotherapeutic agents. They still may stay Schedule 1 when it comes to recreational use, at least at the federal level. Um, they may end up doing what's called bifurcated scheduling. They'll stay Schedule 1 for recreational use, but they'll be in some other category as a prescription drug. But and this obviously doesn't include state level initiatives to lower their scheduling as well, which is occurring in Oregon and Colorado and other places.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, in the decades that you have been studying this, what has been or what have been the most surprising or impactful findings that you and your cohort of researchers have found?
Oh boy. Well, I stopped my studies almost 30 years ago. I gave my last dose of psilocybin and of DMT, I think September 1995. Uh, and I wasn't able to gather a team around me. It was just so far ahead of the curve that nobody really appreciated what we were doing in New Mexico, and I was interested in branching out from the pure brain chemistry into more therapeutic arenas, but I couldn't attract psychotherapy researchers to join my team. So it was more or less mission accomplished. Like I had broken open the door. I given lots of DMT, fair amount of psilocybin, worked out the regulatory scheme, and it was like, okay, I'm done. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so I just became a everyday psychiatrist for the next 13 years. Treated patients in private practice or in mental health clinics. Wrote a couple of books. Um, Yeah, so there was one study in Arizona, psilocybin for cases of OCD. There was some ibogaine research in Miami, in normal volunteers, just to start working with the drug. There were some MDMA studies at UCLA and Wayne State, which I helped them get off the ground. But things really took off with the Hopkins studies. I'm in Baltimore, the mystical experience studies. Um, so you know to answer your question about what's surprising, scientifically, I would say nothing. It's more of the same. uh, can these drugs enhance the psychotherapeutic process? That's kind of old news. Those were studies that were going on in the 50s and the 60s. They're now being performed with more scientific rigor, but they're basically the old they're basically old wine in new bottles. The brain chemistry is pretty much unexceptional. It's another case of old wine in new bottles. We're understanding the electricity, the electrical changes in the brain, the pharmacological uh, uh, changes in the brain. The spirituality part is also uh, like a repetition of the older studies. There was a belief back in the day that if you had a spiritual experience, however defined, after taking a psychedelic, you would automatically be healed of the things that were troubling you, or you would become a better person. The adage, there's no revelation without salvation. So that was in a lot of ways the the driving force behind a lot of the early spirituality research with the psychedelics in on the 1960s. So that's going on as well. That's been renewed. I suppose the most interesting thing, or the most different thing this time around, compared to the earlier wave of human studies, is the commercial interest. There's billions of dollars behind psychedelic research now, to capitalize on their psychotherapeutic effects, and wellness applications. So that's something new and has been surprising. So I'm not sure where that's going to go. I think one of the maybe adverse of these compounds are being touted as miracle drugs with no adverse effects. So I think that may come back to bite us in the ass at some point, unless there is more attention on things going wrong, and how to prevent it, and and if you can't, how to help people who get into trouble after taking psychedelics.
Well, and I think it brings up a good point, and I think it's always illuminating to look at both sides. We've talked for a good amount of time about the impact and benefit that these can have, but somebody from a clinical perspective who has worked with this personally, has conducted studies, what would you describe as the potential slippery slope or downside of these compounds or drugs?
Well, there's I guess what you would call psychiatric adverse effects, and you can divide those into acute and longer term, and even longer term, or acute, short term, and longer term. Most people are kind of anxious at some point in a psychedelic experience, or they're afraid. They might become paranoid. They might become depressed, even suicidal. But there's a lot going on in the mind when you're tripping, and things come and go. Uh, and uh, 9 times out of 10, uh, those frightening or unpleasant feelings will just pass if you let them pass, or if you pray, or you ask for help, or you let go. Any number of ways of dealing with those uh, kind of temporary disturbances. And then there's short-term problems, which you could define as up to 24 hours, which would be residual, very much depressed, or very anxious. And usually, if you ask for help, you take a walk, talk to your therapist, call your friends over. Usually, people can be talked down, and things resolve. Anything longer than 48 hours, that's usually an indication that you need some professional help. uh Speak to your speak to your therapist. Take a sleeping pill if need be, if you're not sleeping. If you're completely crazy, like out of your mind, still hearing things, seeing things, you would want to get yourself to an emergency room, get some help, like even an psychotic drug for a couple of days, let's say. So those are the psychiatric complications. Occasionally I get an email from a friend, or family member of somebody who's just really overdone it on psychedelics. They've taken a ton of LSD, like hundreds of doses in the space of a year or so. Smoked a ton of DMT, 5-methoxy DMT. Oh, speaking of 5-methoxy DMT, that's the active compound in the toad. which people are smoking as well.
Yeah.
Toad venom, which is extracted from their venom glands and then smoked after it's dried. You get flashbacks from the toad. There's it's
Really?
it's relatively common to have flashbacks after smoking 5-methoxy DMT. There's a Dutch study looking at retreatants at a toad retreat, and 75% had flashbacks afterwards.
Huh.
So that's a lot of flashbacks, and I hear every so often of people who are having panic attacks after smoking the toad. One of my psychiatric colleagues, we were smoking the toad once at a retreat center, and he was driving home on the Pacific Coast Highway, and he just fell over onto the passenger seat. He just lost control, and thankfully he could step on the brakes and
That's not
stop. And
optimal.
no, so that's a side effect as well as
Okay.
flashbacks. It's more common with the toad, but it can occur with any psychedelic. Those usually resolve with time, but sometimes they don't. It's a recurrence of certain aspects of the drug trip after the drug is out of your body. Some people really overdo it and they just become delusional, and it's a specific kind of delusion. It's a messianic kind of delusion, that they have got the answer to all the world's ills, and everybody needs to listen, and if they don't, they're pissed off, and they end up in jail or in mental hospitals or things, and they don't really understand that they're kind of off. They think everybody else is off. That's unusual, but it occurs.
Yeah.
One of the adverse effects I think is personality amplification. Like if you're a jerk or a megalomaniac, or you're manipulative, or you're a raging narcissist, lots of times these compounds will just enhance the negative aspects of your personality as well as the positive ones. So if you're already a narcissist and you don't get feedback from your experiences, you just become even more convinced that you're the bee's knees, and you become increasingly intolerable. It isn't a psychosis or a delusion, but it's more of a, I don't know, an unhelpful amplification of negative personality traits.
Hmm. What do you think the future is, at least in the U.S., when it comes to, well, actually, I guess a two-part question. Do you see a shift in your field, psychology, psychiatry, of an enhanced, I don't want to say desire, but an acceptance of use of these drugs in the therapeutic process? And then what do you think the future is going to be for the United States when it comes to utilization of these drugs for therapy?
Well, I think it's important that we don't put the cart before the horse. I think that these are useful drugs, and like as you were saying early on, you've seen people completely turn around
Yeah,
as a result of using them in an optimal kind of setting.
without
And
question.
yeah, and that's true, and that's the yeah, it's a fact. So I think those cases need to be put in context. It's the set and the setting and the dose. So if you're you're primed and do your homework to have a beneficial experience, then chances are that you will, and if you don't, you'll have the resources to get back on track. The problem with this rosy view of psychedelics, that they're for everyone and they have no adverse effects, it is not a good thing. And I think as increased access occurs with legalization, and uh, decriminalization movements, the adverse effects will begin to accumulate and will and will, gradually attract more media interest. And the media, may, turn on us as opposed, to the glowing, optimistic, reporting, which has been going on, for the last, 5 or 10 years. So I hope, that the increased, popularity will not, derail the real, clinical research and, studies, applications, which are, demonstrating, great benefit. So I think, there needs to be a separation, between, careful use and, and, uh, and, uh, careless use. And, that, may be a distinction that is, too difficult, for the, for the larger, public to make. Uh, but I think it's an important one.
There's a lot of things I like about the Mountain Tough program, but I think primarily what I enjoy is they focus on mental toughness in addition to just the physical toughness. Everything they do is grounded in one purpose: life transformations and being strong between the ears in the mind. And there's also a community of 15,000 plus Mountain Tough athletes. So the community is strong, they're supportive, and they're going to help keep you accountable. So you can train anywhere, you can stream anywhere, you can access guided training and on-demand workouts right from your phone, your tablet, or TV or computer, whatever you're into. And everything you need is in one spot. The Mountain Tough subscription gets you access to all the Mountain Tough programs, new programs, and bonus content. And they have programs for everyone. Those who hit the gym and heavy weights, those who like to work out at home with no gear or minimal gear, and everything in between. Mountain Tough has been the trusted training by the dedicated for years now, including U.S. military, special forces, and dedicated backcountry hunters. There is no excuse for you to not start today. With Mountain Tough, you can conquer your goals with the ideal program for your lifestyle and schedule. Train with equipment or just your body weight on your phone, tablet, TV, or web browser. Most importantly, they will help you train your mindset so you are always ready for anything that life throws your way. Mountain Tough subscribers get full access to world-class home and gym programs, groundbreaking mental toughness training, self-improvement, prehab and rehab, biomechanical form coaching, stretching and mobility flows, nutrition guidance, challenge workouts, and the global Mountain Tough community. Mountain Tough is offering Change Agents listeners an incredible offer. You're going to get 40% off on the all-new Mountain Tough Plus annual subscription with the code CHANGEAGENTS. Go to MTNTOUGH.com and enter the code CHANGEAGENTS to receive 40% off, a savings of about $100 on your Mountain Tough Plus annual subscription. That is MTN, Mike Tango November, Tough.com, and enter the code CHANGEAGENTS to save 40%. That is less than 50 cents per day for the best in-class physical and mental training. Ladies and gentlemen, Four Branches Bourbon is the only spirits company founded by veterans from the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. These veterans collaborated with a Bourbon Hall of Fame master distiller and legend to help them make their smooth but complex blend of 4-grain and 96 proof bourbon, blended and bottled in Bardstown, Kentucky. It is often said that bourbon without a story is just brown water, and this bourbon has a story with over 100 combined years of military service around the world. At Four Branches, they are not just crafting some of the finest bourbon, but they are reshaping the drinking narrative. Their motto, "Drink Honorably," embodies their ethos of sipping to remember, not to forget. And as veterans, we get to come home while others did not. So if you're going to drink, please drink honorably, and don't drink to forget, but let's sip to remember. And if you are going to sip and you like bourbon, this has a very interesting taste. Not that I'm a bourbon connoisseur or expert, but smoother than I thought it would be. I've had some bourbons that about ripped my face off. This was the exact opposite, so please enjoy honorably. If you want to learn more about Four Branches, please check out their story at fourbranches.com and pick up a bottle of their fine bourbon today using the code IRONCLAD10. That is all one word, iron, normal spelling, CLAD 10. You're going to get 10% off. What are your thoughts? I've seen this again. Only this is anecdotal, and I've seen this in the community of people that I used to serve with. As I said previously, like without question, massive shift in some individuals. But then I also see it's almost a closed loop where I don't know how often you are supposed to. I mean, I've just heard ibogaine as described as not the most pleasurable experience. It's a little bit of a rougher ride in comparison to ayahuasca. But I've watched a few people who continue to rotate back, and we're talking into the double digits easily and over a relatively short period of time. And it almost seems as if it becomes less about the healing and more about the drug itself. They're very enlightened, and they certainly want to tell you about their enlightenment.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the messianic thing I was, talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, these compounds uh, are not, physically addictive. Like if like for example, if you take LSD every day, you start responding after 4 or 5 days, and there's no withdrawal, like being sweaty or shaky, those kinds of things. But I think there uh, that there can develop psychological dependence. That you have a big trip and it's wonderful, and you come back down to your normal life and it's kind of dull, and you want to trip again, because it's wonderful, or things make sense. When you're in that state, and they may not make sense when you're not in that state. So you could become psychologically dependent on the experience. Like a lot of people like to ask me how many times I've used DMT, and I've used it once, and that's all I needed. Was my mind was totally blown, and I said to myself, this is what I want to study. And you know I just went on with my life, and applied myself to understanding what that experience is about. What's the biology, what's the psychology of that state. There's a saying, like, once you've opened the door, you can, like, oh, well, what's the expression? Once you've gotten the message, you can hang up. So I don't think you need to, trip and trip and trip. The most common piece of advice that I give people who write me about what should they do with their psychedelic experiences is, I say, stop tripping, and get therapy, or find a spiritual group that you feel sympathetic with, and work on the insights that you've obtained, and apply them, as opposed to just going back there. There's a feeling when you're tripping that everything is all right, but everything is not all right, with yourself and with the world. So you can use that as a benchmark, like, okay, I know that there is a feeling out there of everything being all right, and I want that for the world and myself as much as possible. But you don't get that by entering that state of being all right on a regular basis. It's more like the nitty gritty of get your school, get your therapy, do your homework, uh, kind of the more nuts and bolts kinds of things. You can be inspired by the drugs, but they're not going to carry you through necessarily.
Yeah, it's a means to an ends, not the ends in and of itself.
Yeah, they provide insight.
Do you have a personal psychedelic experience that stands out with you above others? Again, from somebody with no experience, I don't know if they kind of all blend together, or you'll have these moments that stick with you for a very extended period of time.
I've got two, I suppose, that stand out. One super good, one super bad. The super bad one kept me from taking psychedelics for quite a few years. I was in college. I was about to start medical school, and I did not want to go to medical school. I just wanted to trip and study Buddhism. Yeah, yeah. And I was about to start medical school, and I was thinking, holy shit, I'm not ready to go to New York and be a medical student. Yeah, and I had like stolen this guy's girlfriend from him on LSD one night, and we were all like hiking around the mountains, the San Gabriel Mountains, near LA, and I went crazy. I got paranoid. I just got completely autistic. I thought, people, yeah, I just withdrew from the world, and I figured I was insane, and I had always been insane. And people all my life had been, treating me as an insane person who hadn't realized it yet. And I flashed on it like, I've always been crazy. That's what everybody's been relating, to me, is as a crazy person. Yeah, and I was visualizing myself in a hospital, like in a seclusion room on the floor, lying in my own shit with some nuns around, like being kind. And I thought, okay, this is my life. I'm going to be lying in a seclusion room, incontinent, with nuns around me. So this was going on for hours, and yeah, and I finally found a friend, like an old friend, my old neighborhood best friend, and knocked on his door, and I said, I need help. Yeah, and we started talking, and he just cut through the bullshit and said, no, that doesn't make any sense. And I came to. So God knows what would have happened if I hadn't bumped into that friend. So that stands out as a rather horrible experience. The best experience, or the most, I guess, outstanding, was backpacking in the Gila Wilderness in southwest New Mexico, and we were taking mushrooms, and we poured them out, and at the bottom of the baggie was this mushroom powder, and somebody said, oh, who wants to take that? So I said, I'll take that. So I just gobbled down this
concentrate.
It was a large dose of your mushroom powder. Yeah, and it was just beatific. I was I was looking at this canyon wall, and I understood fractals. Like, oh, fractals, like things were just going deeper and and uh, uh, deeper and deeper. So I was speaking in tongues. My friends were like around the corner next to a rock, and afterwards they were saying, you were speaking in tongues, you were just speaking some weird language. After that, I laid down at the campsite and just melted into the white light, and I was just floating and hovering in the white light for half hour, for an hour. I understood scriptures in Buddhism that I had been chanting for years and years and years, and I understood what they meant in a way that I had never understood before. The specific verse was, even the slightest twitch shall surely disturb the rhythm. And I understood what that meant. Like, once you start thinking about yourself as opposed to being in the experience, you start coming down. And once you as long as you're in the experience without analyzing or judging, rather than just feeling and experiencing it, then things begin to bifurcate. There's me, there's the experience, there's the ground, there's my shirt, those kinds of things. So that was pretty startling, and it also was important because it confirmed my belief at the time in the appropriateness or the usefulness of Zen, Zen practice in my life at the time. So that's an important point, I think, to make, is that these big experiences aren't necessarily the goal. The experiences more confirm that you're on the right path, and then you continue on the path with new insights, new perspectives.
That makes sense. Dr. Strassman, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'd like to give you the last words. What would you like to leave people with? We covered a lot of ground.
We covered a lot of ground. Well, setting and dose, and set wise, you should be educated. You should learn as much as you can about these drugs if you do plan to use them. Um, you know, uh, find out what other people have said. Know your source. You get yourself ready. Have everything prepared that you'll have the best experience. And if you have any trouble, know how to get help. So there's a lot of groundwork. Somebody asked me once, how do you have a more spiritual psychedelic experience? And I responded, you live a more spiritual life, and then the psychedelics will just build on what you've already got going on. So um work on your intent, work on the reason that you want to trip. Don't expect yourself to change as much as that you will be more the way you want to be. Yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but
I like it.
yeah.
It's good, though. It puts a bow on it very nicely. Thank you so much for your time. I deeply appreciate it.
Well, I do appreciate you having me on your show, Andy. Thanks.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you would like to learn more about this issue, you can, of course, read Rick's books like DMT, The Spirit Molecule, and the Psychedelic Handbook. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Montana Knife Company. We're going to see you next week with an all-new episode.